When you hear the words Mount Everest, what comes to your mind? Perhaps you think of breathtaking views, serene nature, and the thrill of conquering one of the world's natural wonders. But there's a dark side to this majestic mountain, and it's something that we can't ignore. In 2014, Mount Everest witnessed one of the most tragic and heartbreaking moments in modern history. And today we're going to look back to the painful tragedy that claimed many lives. Stay tuned till the very end to know how dangerous nature can be. With that said, let's start. Leading up to the climbing season in May, preparations were being made for the hundreds of people who make the trek to the top of the mountain each year. Most of these climbers rely on the help of local Sherpas, who can make 7 times Nepal's average annual income by accompanying visitors to the summit. These brave men and women risk their lives to help others fulfill their dreams of reaching the peak of Mount Everest. But in 2014, tragedy struck. An avalanche on the mountain killed 16 Sherpas, leaving families devastated and the climbing community in shock. The loss of life was a harsh reminder of the dangers of scaling such a formidable peak. The Sherpas, who are the backbone of the Everest climbing industry, were left reeling from the loss of their colleagues and friends. The aftermath of the disaster brought attention to the working conditions of Sherpas and the risks they face in their jobs. It also raised questions about the impact of tourism on the mountain and the need for better safety measures. The disaster was a wake-up call for the climbing community, reminding us of the risks involved and the importance of respecting the mountain and its inhabitants. While Mount Everest may be a place of wonder and beauty, it's also a place of great danger and tragedy. The 2014 Avalanche disaster serves as a poignant reminder of the risks and sacrifices made by those who call the mountain their home, and it's something we should never forget. The job of a Sherpa is not an easy one. Not only do they risk their lives to help climbers reach the summit of Mount Everest, but they also shoulder the responsibility of planning a safe route up the mountain. This is no small task, as conditions on the mountain are constantly changing and dangers lurk at every turn. In 2014, the Khumbu icefall was of particular concern. This collection of massive ice columns looms at a staggering 18,000 feet up the side of the mountain. For experts, like Hymax mountaineer Russell Bryce, paying attention to these imposing ice blocks is a major part of the job. Planning a route up Mount Everest is not something that can be done haphazardly. It requires careful analysis of the state of the mountain and a deep understanding of the risks involved. The Sherpas take this responsibility seriously, knowing that the lives of the climbers are in their hands. The Khumbu icefall is just one example of the challenges faced by Sherpas on a daily basis. They must be constantly vigilant, anticipating new dangers and setting up new ropes as conditions change. It's a job that requires bravery, skill, and a deep love for the mountain and its people. As we reflect on the tragedy of the 2014 avalanche disaster, we must remember the vital role that Sherpas play in the climbing community. As we said earlier, they are the unsung heroes of Mount Everest, risking their lives to make the dreams of others come true. It's a job that requires a special kind of courage and dedication, and we owe them our respect and admiration. But Mount Everest is a treacherous place, and the dangers that lurk there are not always easy to predict. As we said, one of the biggest hazards facing climbers is the Khumbu icefall, a collection of massive ice columns that looms over the climbing route. These columns are incredibly dangerous. Chunks of ice can break off at any time, especially when the weather and temperature are changing. As a result, climbers must be vigilant and try to get up and out of the way as quick as possible. But sometimes even that's not enough. In 2012, Hymax mountaineer Russell Bryce witnessed one of the larger ice columns, nearly 1,000 feet wide, hanging over the climbing route like a massive sword. Up to 50 people would cram together underneath it at a time, risking their lives in the process. Bryce knew from experience just how dangerous and unpredictable these giant ice columns could be. His concerns about safety eventually reached a breaking point, and he made the difficult decision to call off any future ascents for the time being. But many people thought he was overreacting, and some even criticized him for being too cautious. The truth is, there's no such thing as being too cautious when it comes to climbing Mount Everest. The risks are real, and the consequences of a mistake can be fatal. Sherpas like Bryce know this all too well, as they have witnessed firsthand the tragedy and heartbreak that can occur on the mountain. But we must never forget the lessons learned from tragedies like the 2014 Avalanche disaster, which remind us that even the greatest natural wonders can be deadly. The 2014 avalanche disaster on Mount Everest was a tragedy that affected everyone involved. The unhappiest of all were the HIMAX clients who had paid thousands of dollars to embark on their dream bucket list expedition only to be sent home without ever reaching the summit. It must have been a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that their once-in-a-lifetime opportunity had slipped through their fingers. Of course, it wasn't just the clients who were disappointed. The Sherpas, who'd worked so hard to prepare the route and ensure the safety of the climbers, were also affected by the decision to call off the ascents. But surprisingly, many of them were supportive of the decision. In fact, some of the Sherpas had even helped convince Russell Bryce that he needed to pull back. They knew, better than anyone, just how treacherous the conditions on the mountain could be, and they feared for their own lives in a way that they never had before. These were seasoned climbers, with years of experience, and yet even they were feeling the weight of the danger. To drive home just how risky the situation was, Bryce had even timed some of the most skilled Sherpas as they passed through the Khumbu icefall. He found that when carrying a heavy load, it took them upwards of a half hour to navigate the treacherous terrain. Adding less experienced clients to the mix would only lengthen that time and increase the risk of danger. In the end, the decision to call off the ascents was the right one. It may have been a difficult pill to swallow for the clients, but their safety and the safety of the Sherpas had to come first. As we look back on the 2014 avalanche disaster, we must remember the lessons learned and the sacrifices made by those who worked tirelessly to make climbing Mount Everest a reality. The road to climbing Mount Everest is a long and arduous one. Climbers spend months at base camp, acclimatizing to the high elevation and training their bodies for the treacherous climb ahead. But even with all the preparation, the Khumbu icefall remains a constant threat, looming above them like a sword waiting to strike. Sherpas who know the mountain better than anyone have long been concerned about the safety of climbers passing through this area. In 2014, their fears were realized when an avalanche struck, claiming the lives of 16 Sherpas. Despite the risks, climbers continued to push on, determined to reach the summit, and so the plan was to tackle Khumbu icefall early in the morning, before the sun had a chance to melt the ice and make it even more dangerous. But even with this precaution, tragedy still struck. The avalanche that year was devastating, leaving many injured and others dead. It was a dark moment in the history of Mount Everest, one that left many wondering if the risks of climbing this mountain were simply too great. For the Sherpas, who'd been warned about the dangers of the Khumbu icefall for years, the tragedy was a painful reminder of the risks they face every day on the mountain. But for the climbers, it was a harsh wake-up call, a reminder that even the greatest of natural wonders can be deadly if not treated with the utmost respect and caution. It's truly incredible the amount of bravery and resilience the Sherpas demonstrate as they navigate through the treacherous Khumbu icefall multiple times in a season. It's hard to imagine how terrifying it must be to witness avalanches happening right before your eyes, let alone having to traverse the same dangerous path over and over again. The fact that Sherpas are able to work up the courage to climb the world's biggest mountain despite these risks is a testament to their dedication and passion for their work. It's a reminder of the sacrifices and risks that these guides take on in order to help climbers achieve their dreams of summiting Mount Everest. It's hard to imagine the amount of bravery and dedication it takes to work on the slopes of Mount Everest, and yet the Sherpas make it look easy, even when they're faced with the deadliest section of the climb. The Khumbu icefall has claimed more lives than any other section of the climb. So why is it that these incredibly skilled and experienced workers aren't paid more for their work? It's a question that's been asked time and time again, especially after the tragic events that took place on April the 18th, 2014. That day, 25 men were up on the mountain, doing what they do best, fixing ropes and making sure everything was ready for the paying climbers who would be coming through in the weeks ahead. But little did they know that their lives were about to change forever. As they made their way up the icy slopes, they were completely unaware that a massive avalanche was about to hit. And then it happened. All 25 men were buried under tons of ice and snow, swept off their perches and sent tumbling down the mountain. It's hard to fathom the enormity of what happened that day. The loss of life was staggering, and many of the victims were Sherpas who had dedicated their lives to this work. These were people who had families, dreams, and aspirations, just like the rest of us, and yet they put their lives on the line every day so that others could achieve their goals of climbing the world's highest peak. It's not just the danger that makes their work so incredible, though. It's also the sheer amount of time and effort that goes into it. The Sherpas have to acclimate themselves to the mountain, scaling it up and down multiple times as they prepare the ropes and equipment for the paying climbers. They're constantly exposed to the elements, facing freezing temperatures and harsh winds that would leave most of us shivering in our boots. And yet they keep going, day after day, season after season. So when you consider all of this, it's easy to see why the Sherpas should be paid more for their work. They're the unsung heroes of Everest climbing expeditions, and it's time they receive the recognition and compensation they deserve. After all, without them, the dream of climbing Mount Everest would be nothing more than a distant fantasy. Picture this. A group of 25 men all working hard to ensure that future climbers could make their way up Mount Everest safely. They were Sherpas, experienced climbers who knew the mountain like the back of their hands. One of them, Kaji, was even on camera, proudly talking about how many times he'd climbed the mountain before. And then, in a split second, everything changed. At 6:45 a.m., the ground beneath them gave way, and they were all buried by a massive wall of ice. Can you imagine the horror and chaos of that moment? It's almost impossible to comprehend. These brave men who had worked so hard to make the mountain accessible to others were suddenly in grave danger, and then the largest avalanche in Everest's history swept them all away. People down at base camp watched in stunned silence as a massive cloud of snow rose up the side of the mountain, sounding like thunder as it went. And then it was over. It's heartbreaking to think about the lives that were lost that day, including Kaji's. These men were putting their lives on the line every single day, working in some of the most dangerous conditions on the planet, and yet they were paid so little for their efforts. It's a tragedy that should never be forgotten. The aftermath of the avalanche on Mount Everest was nothing short of devastating. It was heartbreaking to see that despite the best efforts of the rescue teams, they found 13 Sherpas dead. Can you even imagine how difficult it must have been for the rescuers to dig through the snow for 48 hours straight, trying to find survivors? And when they finally did find people, 3 were severely injured and in life-threatening condition. My heart breaks for those who lost their loved ones in this tragedy, especially for Kaji, who had just been talking on camera moments before the disaster struck. It's hard to comprehend the magnitude of this event, the deadliest avalanche to have ever occurred on Mount Everest at that time. I can only hope that we've learned from this tragedy and can take steps to prevent such disasters in the future. The outrage over the inadequate compensation offered to the families of the deceased Sherpas was completely understandable. These brave souls risked their lives every single day to make sure that the climbers attempting to scale the mountain had everything they needed to succeed, including fixing ropes and ladders, carrying heavy equipment and supplies, and providing crucial guidance and support. And yet, when tragedy struck, the government's response was to offer a paltry sum that wouldn't even come close to covering the expenses associated with burying their loved ones. The fact that it took a public outcry and threats of a strike to finally get the government to take action is a sad reflection of the value that society places on the lives of these unsung heroes. It's easy to forget about the sacrifices made by those who work behind the scenes to make these expeditions possible, but we must never forget the debt of gratitude we owe them. They deserve to be compensated fairly for the risks they take, and their families deserve to be taken care of when tragedy strikes. Thankfully, some changes were eventually implemented as a result of the 2014 Everest avalanche disaster. The Nepalese government eventually agreed to pay $10,000 to the families of the deceased Sherpas, which was a significant improvement over the initial offering. And the routes up the mountain were changed to try and avoid the dangerous Khumbu icefalls. These changes were a step in the right direction, but there is still much work to be done to ensure that Sherpas and other workers on Everest are treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. The aftermath of the 2014 Everest avalanche disaster brought about some much-needed changes. The fact that the Nepalese government finally agreed to pay $10,000 to the families of the victims was a step in the right direction, even though it was a long time coming. It's good to see that the families were finally given some measure of financial support, especially considering the danger and risk that the Sherpas face on a daily basis. The changes to the route up Everest were also an important development. The fact that the same route had been used for so many years, despite the inherent risks and dangers, was a major concern. By changing the route, climbers and Sherpas alike can hopefully avoid the Khumbu icefalls and other dangerous areas. These changes are a clear indication that people are starting to take the safety of those who work on Everest seriously. Of course, there's still much work to be done to ensure the safety and well-being of those who work on the mountain, but the fact that the changes are being made is a positive sign. Hopefully, as time goes on, more improvements will be made to ensure that the Sherpas who work on Everest are properly compensated and protected from harm. After all, they are the unsung heroes of the climbing expeditions, and they deserve our respect and support. The 2014 Everest Avalanche disaster was a heartbreaking event that shook the world and changed the course of climbing history. The loss of the lives of Sherpas and the injury of many others was a tragedy that left an indelible mark on the mountain and its community. The avalanche served as a wake-up call for the Nepalese government and the climbing industry, highlighting the need for better support and resources for the Sherpa community who risk their lives to support climbers. The changes implemented after the disaster, including the increase in compensation for victims' families and the modification of the route, were important steps in the right direction. However, there is still much work to be done to ensure the safety and well-being of those who continue to climb Everest. The 2014 Everest Avalanche disaster was a reminder of the power of nature and the importance of respecting the mountain and those who call it home. And this brings us to the end of the video. We hope you found our videos informative and thought-provoking. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update from us. And remember, disasters can happen to anyone, but by coming together and sharing knowledge, we can build a safer and more resilient future. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.